Okay, am I pretty clear on the mic? I'm excited to present this paper. This is joint work with Georgios Zervas. He's currently on a beach in Greece. I'm presenting two papers in this session because both my co-authors are doing different things. You'll find out what Charles is up to later. And this is a project which is the part we submitted to EC is a smaller project on the supply and demand effects of the hotel industry. My laptop died, so you've got my old slides rather than my new slides. But we have this bigger project looking at the impact of consumer reviews. So what is it that we're really interested in general? So we're interested in the idea of crowdsourced ratings. So we're familiar with these in all kinds of contexts, right? So from product reviews on Amazon through to hotel reviews in the hotel market. All the time we think of people now going out and rating things, people rating things on Yelp, and people making decisions about what to do as a function of those ratings. And the kinds of questions we're interested in are, firstly, do these have measurable effects on the market as a whole? So does it matter that we have hotel ratings on Expedia or hotels or TripAdvisor? Do they really change where people choose to stay? First question. Secondly, does that seem to have effects on pricing? And thirdly, does that ultimately affect consumers and welfare? And so in this 20 minutes, I don't think I'm going to get to welfare, but I might hint at the kinds of results we eventually get to on welfare. So what am I talking about today? I'm talking about concretely these scores that you get. So if you look here, I think I'm looking at Expedia, and here we have a 4.3 out of 5 is the score for the Shelburne Hotel. That's the number we're interested in. And you might think that the welfare effect of consumer reviews depends a lot more on more than just the score, than the scalar metric. One of the things you might think matters is the actual review text and the ability of people reading the review text to find a hotel that better served their needs. We're not going to be paying attention to that because we're going to try and filter this through an econometric lens. And it's going to be a whole lot easier for us if there's just a number to pay attention to. And so the number we're thinking of here is the rating attached to each of these hotels. And what we'd like to do is ask the question, what happens when we get more information? How does that affect consumer behavior and firm conduct? I'm not going to talk about the literature, except to say that there is a lot of literature on this. And in particular, maybe the papers, I'd like to point to the papers that you may have seen on Yelp, due to Mike Luca and then Anderson Magruder as well, that ask the question, what are changes in your review scores on Yelp due to revenue? And what we're going to do that's a little bit different here to those papers is that we're going to try and break down these effects of reviews into both pricing effects and quantity effects. Remember, revenue is just the product of those two things. We'd like to know what's the decomposition of this. How are reviews affecting demand? How are reviews affecting supply? And how are those things interacting? OK, why should you care about this? Well, I think it's just an interesting question. I have this strong prior that information really is important. Information provision is really important in markets. And that in general, this is empowering consumers, and this leads to big welfare benefits, that it's really very good that people are getting access to this information. The other reason you might pay attention is that a lot of policy organizations are starting to pay attention to it. A lot of government regulators are paying attention to it. They're often interested in the problem of fake reviews. If these are important marketplaces, we should then be worried about fake information. How worried should we be about this? Is anybody actually reading these things in the first place? If they are, how badly can fake reviews affect things? Should we be helping companies to better police fake reviews so that better better consumer decisions can be made? OK, so I'm going to mostly skip ahead to the findings so that I can get to those and actually go through the econometrics a little bit slowly. The first finding of the paper is that hotel reviews have substantial effect on demand and consequently on prices. So we find that a rating point increases demand by 25% in 2014. Now, a rating point, if you think about it in hotels, is a pretty big effect. Going from 3.5 to 4.5 is substantial. So you should think of a more typical size effect as being a 0.1 rating point increase, and then it's about 2.5%. That's still a pretty big number. We also see increases in price. And so you might ask, why do prices go up for hotels that have higher ratings? And the easiest story you should think of as the standard supply and demand picture. I'm going to do this backwards. It's going to look at bad karate if I do it. So let me not try to do this right. But what you should think of as going on is that in hotels, supply curves are upward sloping. Okay, essentially, this is a revenue management thing. As I sell more rooms, I raise my price. And I don't have to think very hard about this. I just pre-allocate buckets, a little bit like airline pricing, so that as I sell a lot of seats, I start to make the seats more expensive. So the supply curve is upward sloping. If you give me a demand curve that moves along it, then prices will tend to go up. And that we find to be most of the mechanism. There's a little bit of evidence, but it's kind of weak, that hotels that get higher ratings start to move their entire schedules up and down. So they say, oh, our rating has gone up. We will make every room in every bucket a little bit more expensive. But most of the time, we see not much evidence of that happening. What's actually going on is simply that as the reviews improve, demand goes up, and you move along the upward sloping supply curve, and prices go up. That's result one. Result two is there's substantial heterogeneity. One thing that's really striking in our data, it goes back to 2005. So we have data from 2005 to 2014, is how much bigger those effects have got over time. So I'll show you the exact numbers later on. But I think on average, it's 6% across the entire sample and 25% by 2014. So that is to say more and more people are shopping online. Because they're shopping online, they're paying more and more attention to reviews. The reviews are really driving demand. So this is an increasingly important phenomenon. I don't really know whether it's attenuating as we hit 2019, but certainly in our pattern, it's going up pretty fast. The second thing is it matters more for high-end hotels. So reviews matter if you're selling a high-quality product. That makes sense. The people who are paying a lot of money expect to get something very good. Therefore, they care very much that the reviews are good. And the effects are also bigger for independent hotels. Again, that makes sense. If I've got a chain hotel, there's not really any reason to look at reviews. I know what a Marriott looks like. If I've stayed at one before, I probably know most of them already. But if I'm staying at an independent hotel, getting the reviews actually matters a lot. And so therefore, people react more to reviews for independent hotels. And then these are the results I'm not really going to talk about because they're not really in the EC paper. But I just want to hint at them because I think they're actually what we find most interesting, this much longer project that we've been working on for years. We find basically that consumers are $1 to $2 per room night better off because of reviews. A hotel room costs in our data on average about $100. So that's 1 to 2%. I don't know whether you think that's a big or a small number. I once gave a seminar at Princeton and asked everybody in advance what they thought the number was. And they were like, oh, $1 to $2, which was kind of striking for crowdsourcing as a response. I was like, really? You just guessed that? And I spent 3 years computing those numbers? Anyway, in any case, the answer seems to be that, yeah, these things matter. Reviews matter. But they don't matter maybe as much as I would have thought a priori. Part of that story is about capacity constraints. So the fact that the world is capacity constrained means that there's only so much that giving better information can do. Because even if I tell you that Hotel A is better than Hotel B, Hotel A is a fixed number of rooms. And so there's only a fixed amount of margin for adjustment. But even still, the capacity constraints don't seem to, if you get rid of capacity constraints, it doesn't change things that much. OK, let me skip ahead then to trying proving the 2 points that I want to show you. I want to show you our empirical analysis. So we have hotel data from Smith Travel Research. It covers the Western United States. It's about 10% of the US hotel market. And we have a census of all the hotels. So we know all the hotels. But what we're mostly going to be paying attention to is a subset of the hotels who report their financial performance. In particular, they report both rooms sold and revenue, which means you can deduce average price per room. So we know quite a lot. We also observe a set of amenities, the location, the capacity, the ownership, et cetera. And we augment this data set with hotel reviews from TripAdvisor, Expedia, and Hotels.com. The main independent variable, the thing that you're going to be paying attention to most in this talk, is the average review for that hotel at a given point in time. So at this point in time, what you would see if you went to TripAdvisor, currently this hotel has a 4.6. Okay, so that's the variable you should be paying attention to. You might wonder whether that's the variable consumers should pay attention to. Why don't they pay attention to what's happened recently, say the last 2 months of reviews? It turns out most people pay most attention to sort of the most salient thing in front of them. Yes? Yeah, so there's definitely an apples to bananas kind of comparison going on here, where in 2005, there were far fewer reviews. There were many missing reviews. Some hotels didn't have reviews at all. And so there's this difficult question of, what I care about is not just the number of reviews, but how many reviews there are. Because if I was a Bayesian, I'd be like, well, how confident am I that this is actually a 4.6? And so you might think that one reason people didn't pay very much attention in 2005 is they thought there just isn't enough data to pay attention to. We're not really going to be able to disentangle that. And part of that reason for that is a sort of a difficult endogeneity problem. You could stick number of views on the right-hand side of some equations. You could say this is an explanatory variable. It's obviously correlated with any latent factor that explains stay. And so if you stick it in your regression, you're going to get kind of crazy coefficients on it. And so it's difficult to interpret those kinds of regressions. But we do think that those are problems. OK. And I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to skip that. OK, so I want to actually pay most attention. I'm going to skip a lot of things, because what I really want to do is pay attention to the idea of trying to find these effects and how we actually estimate this. So, and also apparently on Max, weird things happen to equations. Interesting. OK, well, I'll just tell you about the equations. It'll be fine. OK, so what are we going to do here? We're going to do this a couple of ways. And I might get to tell you about all three, but I'll probably get to two of them. So one way we're going to look at this is we're just going to run an OLS regression, so straight least squares, except that we're going to use a lot of controls. OK, so we're going to try and find a causal relation between reviews and quantity, so how many people are staying there, using a lot of controls. So how are we going to do that? We're going to essentially do a discrete choice demand system, which amounts to taking a log quantity and regressing it on stuff. One of the problems here is that you have to control for price, and price is endogenous, which is something that econometricians will typically worry about. And then what we're going to do in these regressions is we're simply going to calibrate the price elasticity. So we're going to say the price elasticity is minus 1.6, and we're going to enforce that coefficient throughout, rather than trying to find an instrument. So it's very hard to find plausible price instruments. We know from the structural part of this paper, which does a lot more work, that the price elasticity is in that range. And so for the reduced form regressions, I'm simply going to calibrate it. And the structural model, which I won't be presenting, we do a lot of work on the supply side moments to kind of work that out. OK, so we're going to run log quantity adjusted for price on stuff. What are the things that constitute stuff? Ratings, so that's the main thing we care about. Hotel fixed effects, and market time fixed effects. So the San Francisco market in 2017, we're going to control for a time effect there. Every hotel is also going to get its own effect. And what we're going to be interested in is what's the coefficient on ratings in this regression, and how does that covary with other factors? So how do we learn heterogeneous treatment effects here? And what we find is what I told you before. So we get a sort of a 6.5% effect on average rating. These things are all significant. Our data says like 450,000 observations, so pretty much everything is going to be significant. You'll see some things that aren't, but pretty much everything is significant after clustering. We see that the effective ratings is bigger at independent hotels, a little bit smaller at franchise hotels, and the least big at chain hotels. We see also that it's more important at luxury hotels than economy hotels. And in fact, those coefficients are monotone as you go up by hotel segment. And we show you also that this is increasing in ratings. So many ways of showing that over time. So many ways of showing that these effects go the right direction. The same thing is true for price. And I'm going to skip the price thing because I have 5 minutes. And what I'm going to show you instead is this picture. So you might wonder if the reason that I see higher prices with higher ratings is story A on the left there, which is that the supply curve is adjusted when the ratings go up, or story B, which is that the supply curve is actually just fixed. It's upward sloping, and demand moves along that supply curve. And it turns out it's story B. How could you tell that? Well, it turns out you have to run instrumental variables regressions to try and learn the supply curve. Here I need to have demand shifters. Plausible demand shifters are weather. And so I use weather as a demand shifter, and I end up learning that, in fact, the effect of ratings is basically 0 on the demand curve. OK. So we've done a lot of stuff to show you causality, a lot of OLS stuff. But generally speaking, that's not enough. In the economics literature, you need something a little bit more like a quasi-experiment. So we found a quasi-experiment that gives us some results. So this is the experiment. In 2013, Expedia and Hotels.com merged their review databases. So one of them acquired the other. I think Expedia acquired Hotels.com. And then about a year later, they decided to put their reviews together to give better information to consumers. So now what happens is that the same hotel might end up with new ratings. So I'm going to show you that example here. In May 2013, there's only one review in Expedia. It's 4 out of 5. On hotels, there's 5 reviews at 4.2. Afterwards, there are 6 reviews. They're the same on hotels and Expedia. And suddenly, Expedia, the rating has jumped from 4 to 4.2. So there's this sudden discontinuous jump of reviews on Expedia. Part of this is due to the fact that they're actually adding in other reviews, and part of it is due to rounding. So there's actually just a rounding up. What we're going to do is the rounding variation. So we're going to say, what is the difference between what the average rating across these two platforms would have been in the pre-period and what it is after the post-period? One of the features of this little experiment is that this hotel looks better than it should have done, even if you were just taking a straight average of its ratings across the two, because it benefits from the fact that there's a 0.1 rounding scale on this platform. And so Expedia rounds up, both of them round up this 4.16 or whatever to 4.2. So we use that rounding variation in equations that make no sense at all. And we then go ahead and run some regressions that are essentially difference in differences. So after this merger, the rounded variation, so the treatment effect, how much does that vary for different platforms? I can show you that most hotels were not really affected by this merger. They had the same ratings before and after. But there are a lot of hotels sort of locally that went up by a rating point or down by a rating point, up by 0.1 or down by 0.1. I can show you that the people who got treated and the people who didn't get treated are kind of similar. And I can show you that the ratings effect sizes are actually very big. So it looks like post-merger, the people who benefited from this rounding went up in demand by about 26%. There are big standard errors because it's a much smaller data set, but it's consistent with our OLS results. And so in particular, we conclude that there doesn't seem to be any particularly strong evidence of endogeneity. I have no reason to distrust the OLS results based on this experiment. OK, so and we can also do placebo tests to convince you that this works. So I have basically 1 minute. So what I want you to take away from this, I want you to take away that there are causal effects of review platforms, that they're going up over time, that the way that they occur is mostly through demand shifting people along a supply curve. I can't show you this now, but it's true of the welfare analysis that we do subsequently, that the pricing effects attenuate, the repricing attenuates some of the value of better information. So consumers who get better information want to stay at better hotels, but those better hotels are now more expensive because other people want to stay there too. And so the welfare effects are going to be smaller because of the repricing. And in fact, overall, we find that they're not very big when we do a much longer and more complicated structural analysis. OK, thank you very much.